Rules don't pause for funerals.
Dignity does. You just broke it.
Denied, Marjorie Klein said, sliding the paper across the counter without looking up. The board chair's voice was flat, practiced, like she was approving paint colors instead of stopping a funeral. The enforcer in crimson stood to her left, arms folded, eyes already bored with my grief. I felt the room tilt. The clipboard queen tapped her pen, waiting for me to react. The tyrant in heels finally met my eyes and added, "Rules are rules," as if that settled anything. I said one sentence, quiet and steady. "You don't have the authority to delay a burial." It wasn't an argument, it was a line, and she stepped over it anyway. If you've ever felt that moment when cruelty hides behind procedure and something inside you hardens, stay with me and hit subscribe now. My name is Caleb Knox. I'd spent decades drafting wills, closing estates, and guiding families through the narrow corridors between loss and closure. I knew the laws that protect the dead and the living who bury them. Marjorie Klein knew that too. She just believed I wouldn't use them today. The denial sat between us, ink still fresh. No procession access, no temporary gate opening, no exceptions. The board chair cited community disruption, while my wife lay in a casket a mile away, waiting on permission that never should have been required. The enforcer in crimson shifted her weight, signaling the meeting was over. The clipboard queen gathered her folders like props after a show. The hallway outside smelled of cleaner and stale coffee. I stood there, paper shaking in my hand, listening to my own breathing echo off the tile. This wasn't a scheduling issue. This was revenge, delivered at the precise moment it would hurt most. My wife had hated delays. She believed in keeping promises, in doing hard things on time. We'd planned the service together during her last clear week, choosing the route, the music, the quiet at the end. Watching that plan stall because of a signature felt like watching her disappear twice. I called the funeral director from the parking lot. His voice dropped when I explained. He said he'd never seen an HOA block a burial route. He said he'd wait as long as he could. He didn't say what would happen if we ran out of time. Back inside, Marjorie Klein's heels clicked past me, sharp and decisive. The board chair didn't slow. The enforcer in crimson followed, already texting. The clipboard queen avoided my eyes. The tyrant in heels paused just long enough to say, "You should have thought about consequences." I leaned against the wall until the shaking stopped. Grief does strange things to the body. It narrows your vision. It sharpens your memory. I remembered the last promise I made to my wife, whispered in a hospital room when the machines went quiet. I would see this through. I would not let her be delayed by someone else's pettiness. Outside, the sun was too bright. Neighbors passed, unaware that a funeral had just been paused by paperwork. I wondered where you were watching from, because this kind of cruelty doesn't belong to one street or one boardroom. It happens anywhere silence is mistaken for consent. I folded the denial carefully and put it in my pocket. Not as evidence yet, as resolve. The board chair thought this was the end of a conversation. The enforcer in crimson thought intimidation would work. The clipboard queen thought process would protect them. The tyrant in heels thought grief would slow me down. They were wrong. I started the engine and drove toward the cemetery, knowing the clock was moving and that every minute mattered now. This wasn't about winning. It was about dignity, and once dignity is taken hostage, the only honest response is to free it, whatever it costs. I reached the cemetery gate as the hearse idled, engine ticking, the driver waiting for my call. The late afternoon air smelled like cut grass and exhaust. I told him to hold, then stepped aside and stared at the iron bars that should never have mattered. Marjorie Klein's decision rippled outward immediately. The board chair had copied half the neighborhood on a notice about route compliance, pretending concern while ensuring delay. The enforcer in crimson followed with a reminder about fines. The clipboard queen sent a checklist that read like punishment. The tyrant in heels said nothing, which told me everything. Inside the chapel office, the funeral director paced, hands folded, voice low. He explained the clock without pressing me. Staff schedules, burial windows, families waiting. He said he'd never seen access used this way. I believed him. I'd practiced long enough to recognize pretext. I walked the route we'd planned, noting cones placed where they didn't belong, a temporary gate locked without authority, a security guard standing uncertainly beside it. Neighbors gathered in small groups, whispering. A woman asked why we were waiting. I told her the truth. Her mouth tightened. Phones buzzed, messages stacked. Marjorie Klein framed the delay as neutrality. The board chair cited consistency. The enforcer in crimson threatened enforcement. The clipboard queen asked for patience. The tyrant in heels waited for submission. I called the property manager and asked simple questions. He answered carefully, eyes flicking to the locked gate. He said approvals were discretionary. I asked who held discretion. He hesitated. That hesitation mattered. The hearse ticked. Time pressed. Grief sharpened into focus. I remembered my wife's handwriting on the program draft, the route circled twice. She'd chosen it because it passed the oak where we took our first walk. Delay wasn't inconvenience. It was erasure. I documented what I could without turning the moment into theater. Photos of cones, a time-stamped video of the locked gate, names of witnesses who offered them freely. Community canvassing doesn't require speeches. It requires listening. A neighbor mentioned a similar delay months earlier. A contractor blocked until fees were paid. Another recalled a holiday citation issued during a medical emergency. Patterns surfaced when people felt safe to speak. Marjorie Klein escalated by email, warning about non-compliant gatherings. The board chair CC'd counsel. The enforcer in crimson moved closer to the gate. The clipboard queen updated the checklist. The tyrant in heels finally appeared, posture crisp, telling me to reschedule. I didn't argue. I asked the funeral director for options. He said we could wait an hour, maybe two. After that, consequences multiplied. I thanked him and stepped away. I called a colleague, not for documents, but for confirmation of boundaries I already knew. He confirmed burial interference triggers liability. He confirmed intent matters. He confirmed timing would speak. I returned to the gate and asked the guard who ordered the lock. He said, Marjorie Klein. The board chair's name landed cleanly. Witnesses heard it. As the sun dipped, the crowd grew quieter, resolve replacing confusion. I felt the shift. This wasn't just my loss anymore. It was a community seeing cruelty up close. I told the hearse to wait 10 more minutes. Then I called Marjorie Klein and left a voicemail stating facts only. The board chair didn't respond. The enforcer in crimson didn't either. The clipboard queen sent another checklist. The tyrant in heels watched the clock. When the gate finally opened, it was too late to pretend nothing had happened. The delay had done its damage, and everyone there knew who caused it. The gate swung open with a hollow scrape, too late to pretend mercy. People stepped aside, the hearse rolled forward, and the moment passed with a bruise you could feel but not point to. I watched the procession move, then turned away before anyone could read my face. I went straight to the management office, the same beige building that smelled like toner and air freshener. Inside, Elliot Marsh sat at a side desk, shoulders rounded, fingers worrying the seam of a folder he hadn't opened. He looked up when I entered, then immediately looked down again. Marjorie Klein wasn't there yet, but she filled the room anyway. The board chair's presence lingered in the way Elliot sat too straight when footsteps passed the hall. The enforcer in crimson had left her mark too, a tension that made him flinch at the door chime. The clipboard queen's influence showed in the stacks of forms aligned just so. The tyrant in heels ruled by anticipation. I didn't speak at first. I took a seat across from Elliot and waited. Silence does work if you let it. He cleared his throat, then stopped. He adjusted his glasses, then took them off, rubbing the bridge of his nose like he was trying to erase a thought. He started to say something procedural and caught himself. His foot tapped once, twice, then stilled when he noticed. He folded his hands, unfolded them, then slid the folder a fraction of an inch toward me before pulling it back. The movement said more than words. Marjorie Klein arrived mid-breath, heels crisp, eyes sharp. The board chair greeted Elliot without looking at him, already talking about consistency. The enforcer in crimson followed, arms crossed, scanning me like I was a problem to be solved. The clipboard queen drifted to the counter, pen poised. The tyrant in heels smiled thinly and asked if we were finished here. I asked one neutral question, careful and slow, about who authorized the lock. Elliot's eyes flicked to Marjorie Klein, then to the floor. His jaw tightened. The board chair answered for him, citing discretion. The enforcer in crimson nodded. The clipboard queen wrote. The tyrant in heels waited. I asked again, softer, about the timing. Elliot swallowed. His shoulders rose and fell. He opened his mouth, closed it, then said the word verbal. It came out small. The room froze. Marjorie Klein stepped closer, voice cool, reminding him of roles. The board chair placed a hand on the desk, claiming authority. The enforcer in crimson shifted, blocking the doorway. The clipboard queen stopped writing. The tyrant in heels watched Elliot like a clock. Elliot's fingers curled into the folder. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He nodded once, then shook his head, caught between obedience and what he'd just witnessed at the gate. He stared at the carpet, then up at me, eyes wet, jaw set. I said nothing. I didn't need to. He'd seen the delay. He'd heard the engine tick. He'd watched people wait. Marjorie Klein dismissed the meeting, tone final. The board chair turned on her heel. The enforcer in crimson followed. The clipboard queen gathered papers. The tyrant in heels paused, measuring Elliot, then left. When the door closed, the room exhaled. Elliot sagged back into his chair, rubbing his face with both hands. He didn't look at me for a long moment. When he did, he nodded again, slower this time. He didn't confess. Not yet, but his body had already chosen a side. And once a witness crosses that line inside themselves, the rest becomes a matter of time. The morning after the burial, the neighborhood woke to notices taped crookedly on doors. By the time I finished my coffee, 3 had already fluttered loose and stuck to hedges like warnings. Marjorie Klein's signature sat at the bottom of each, bold and unmistakable. The board chair had decided escalation was easier than reflection. I walked the loop slowly, reading what neighbors had already read twice. Temporary compliance audits, immediate assessments, retroactive fees. The enforcer in crimson followed up with an email blast before noon, a parade of deadlines designed to overwhelm. The clipboard queen attached spreadsheets. The tyrant in heels stayed silent, which meant pressure was coming from somewhere else. At the clubhouse, a line formed before the doors opened. People clutched notices and phones, voices low. I took a seat near the window and watched the parking lot fill. Grief had burned down to a steady coal. Focus replaced anger. Marjorie Klein arrived late, heels sharp, posture immaculate. The board chair spoke first, framing the audits as routine. The enforcer in crimson flanked her, scanning faces. The clipboard queen distributed forms. The tyrant in heels announced penalties for noncompliance, tone pleasant, eyes cold. Questions rose. Why now? Why retroactive? Why fees without hearings? Marjorie Klein answered with procedure. The board chair deflected. The enforcer in crimson shut down side conversations. The clipboard queen smiled tightly. The tyrant in heels warned about liens. I listened. Patterns matter. Audits clustered on certain streets. Fees targeted homes that had complained before. Timing aligned with the burial delay fallout. This wasn't governance. It was leverage. Outside, I spoke with neighbors one by one. Community canvassing doesn't require speeches. It requires trust. A retired teacher showed me a notice citing a rule change last year. A contractor pointed out fines assessed without inspections. A nurse described a holiday citation during a family emergency. Stories overlapped. Back inside, Marjorie Klein announced a special assessment vote, effective immediately. The board chair claimed urgency. The enforcer in crimson blocked questions. The clipboard queen passed the sign-in sheet. The tyrant in heels called time. I raised my hand once. I didn't argue. I asked about insurance. Silence answered first, then deflection. The board chair said coverage was adequate. The enforcer in crimson said liability was hypothetical. The clipboard queen avoided eye contact. The tyrant in heels moved on. Afterward, I called an insurance broker I'd worked with for years, not for documents, but for thresholds. He explained exposure plainly. Interference with funerals carries risk. Retaliatory enforcement multiplies it. Special assessments tied to punitive action raise flags. Insurers notice patterns. By afternoon, the notices had reached social feeds. Screenshots circulated. A local group asked for clarity. I posted facts only. No accusations. Dates, actions, consequences. The comments filled in the rest. Marjorie Klein responded with another notice. This one sterner. The board chair warned about misinformation. The enforcer in crimson threatened penalties. The clipboard queen updated the spreadsheet. The tyrant in heels scheduled a closed session. I met Elliot Marsh briefly in the parking lot. He didn't stop walking. His shoulders were tight. He said nothing, but he slowed when I mentioned insurance. He nodded once, barely, then kept going. That night, I laid everything out on the table, not as evidence yet, but as a map. Who acted, when, who paid, who watched. Economic pressure doesn't shout, it accumulates. Marjorie Klein believed escalation would exhaust us. The board chair believed authority would shield her. The enforcer in crimson believed fear would work. The clipboard queen believed process would protect them. The tyrant in heels believed silence would finish the job. They had misjudged the cost, and costs, once calculated, don't care who's in charge. I met the broker at his office downtown, a glass-walled suite overlooking a parking structure that hummed with late traffic. The place smelled like coffee and printer toner, familiar and neutral. I chose it because neutrality sharpens facts. He didn't ask why I was there. He already knew. News travels faster than notices. I sat across from him and described the delay, the audits, the special assessment, the timing. I didn't bring papers. I didn't need to. He listened, pen still, eyes narrowing at the right moments. Marjorie Klein's name landed differently here. The board chair wasn't authority in this room. She was exposure. The enforcer in crimson became a multiplier. The clipboard queen became a process risk. The tyrant in heels became intent. He explained thresholds without dramatics. Interference with funerals triggers scrutiny. Retaliatory enforcement following a public incident raises premiums. Closed sessions during escalation invite review. Special assessments tied to punitive action can void protections. Insurers don't argue morality. They price behavior. I asked one question about timelines. He answered with another. When did it start? I told him. He nodded. Then it's already started. Outside, rain began without warning, tapping the glass like a metronome. The city kept moving. Inside, the math settled. He said underwriters look for patterns, not apologies. He said boards confuse authority with insulation. He said carriers hate surprises. He said once a carrier flags a community, everything costs more. I thanked him and left with nothing in my hands and clarity in my head. Discovery doesn't always arrive as a document. Sometimes it's a sentence that rearranges the board. On the drive back, my phone buzzed. Another notice from Marjorie Klein. The board chair announced a temporary coverage review, framing it as diligence. The enforcer in crimson added urgency. The clipboard queen asked for patience. The tyrant in heels scheduled a meeting. They felt it. That mattered. I stopped by the funeral home to check on staff who'd waited with us. The director told me quietly that vendors had asked questions, routes, permissions, delays, costs. He said delays ripple through invoices. He said invoices talk. Back at the neighborhood, I walked the same loop as before. People met my eyes now. A man asked if assessments could rise. A woman asked about insurance. I answered carefully, facts only, calm. Marjorie Klein called that evening. The board chair's voice was controlled, offering to reset. The enforcer in crimson hovered on speaker. The clipboard queen emailed a revised agenda mid-call. The tyrant in heels proposed mediation. I didn't commit. I asked about coverage. Silence followed, then deflection, then irritation, then a promise to check. After the call, I wrote nothing down. I didn't need to. The discovery was complete. Economic pressure wasn't a lever to be pulled later. It was already pressing. That night, I slept for the first time since the burial without waking. Grief doesn't vanish. It settles. It leaves room for precision. Marjorie Klein believed she could outweight consequences. The board chair believed procedure would blur intent. The enforcer in crimson believed posture would intimidate. The clipboard queen believed forms would shield. The tyrant in heels believed timing favored them. They were wrong about timing. Timing favors math, and math had entered the room. The urgency arrived before sunrise, in the form of a voicemail that cut through the quiet. It was from the carrier's local adjuster, asking for a callback about exposure. I listened twice, then stood at the window until the light changed. This wasn't pressure anymore, it was momentum. Time had started billing interest, and everyone would pay it, soon, whether they noticed or not. By 9, Marjorie Klein had called a special session and labeled it urgent. The board chair framed it as stewardship, but the agenda told another story. Insurance review, vendor risk, emergency reserves. The enforcer in crimson forwarded reminders every 15 minutes. The clipboard queen attached revised numbers with no explanation. The tyrant in heels closed comments. Urgency was the message. Fear was the tool. Briefly. I drove to the clubhouse but didn't go inside. Instead, I sat in the car and watched arrivals. Neighbors came with folded notices and tight faces. A contractor parked, then left. 2 realtors lingered longer than usual. Economic signals don't announce themselves. They gather. I called the broker again, not to escalate, just to confirm sequence. He confirmed. Underwriters were asking questions already, quietly, today. Inside, Marjorie Klein took control of the room fast. The board chair spoke about prudence while avoiding the word funeral. The enforcer in crimson warned about misinformation again. The clipboard queen projected charts that climbed sharply. The tyrant in heels asked for votes without discussion. Hands rose, then paused. People were calculating. So was I. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about cost. During a break, Elliot Marsh stood by the copier, unmoving. His shoulders were tight, eyes fixed on the floor. I didn't approach him. He approached me. He spoke without looking up, voice low, words careful. He said carriers hate retaliation. He said timing matters. He said he'd been asked to backdate notes. Then he stopped. His hands shook once. That was enough. For now, absolutely. The session ended with a vote to raise reserves immediately. Marjorie Klein called it responsible. The board chair ignored questions about cause. The enforcer in crimson enforced silence. The clipboard queen emailed the outcome before people stood. The tyrant in heels smiled. Outside, phones lit up, numbers spread faster than explanations. A lender called a neighbor. A buyer paused. Momentum tightened. So did the timeline. I went home and sat at the table we'd shared for years. The quiet felt earned and heavy. I called my colleague again, this time to commit. He didn't celebrate. He outlined next steps in plain language. Notice carriers, preserve communications, let costs surface. No theatrics. Precision. Grief steadied my hand. I wasn't rushing anymore. The pressure would do the work. Soon, relentlessly, predictably, legally. That night, Marjorie Klein emailed a conciliatory note. The board chair offered to revisit assessments. The enforcer in crimson suggested mediation again. The clipboard queen attached a calendar. The tyrant in heels asked for discretion. I replied with availability only. No commentary. Silence is expensive when clocks are running. They felt it. So did the community. Costs were now public and climbing. Everywhere. Quietly. Again. Before sleep, I checked the route one last time. The oak stood where it always had. I touched the bark and breathed. Dignity had been delayed, not denied. Accountability was catching up. Marjorie Klein had made it personal. The board chair had made it financial. Those choices don't age well. I turned off the light. Tomorrow would be louder. For them, not for me, anymore. The decision settled fully as I lay awake, listening to the house. Grief and resolve can coexist without canceling each other. This was the moment commitment replaces reaction. I committed. The pressure would continue tomorrow and the day after until the numbers finished speaking. They always do, eventually, without anger, without noise, without mercy, just math, memory, and consequence, working patiently, relentlessly, precisely, legally, finally. Elliot Marsh asked to meet after hours, choosing a neutral place where conversations didn't echo. An empty coffee shop just off the main road, lights dimmed, chairs stacked except for one corner table. He arrived early and kept his coat on, hands wrapped around a cup he hadn't touched. When I sat down, he nodded once and stared at the window like he was timing traffic. Marjorie Klein wasn't there, but she pressed in anyway. The board chair's shadow lived in Elliot's posture, shoulders drawn tight, spine stiff. The enforcer in crimson had taught him to measure every word. The clipboard queen had trained him to hide behind process. The tyrant in heels had taught him what happened when you didn't. He started with an apology that wasn't one, then stopped. He took a breath and tried again, slower. He said he'd been instructed to log the gate lock as maintenance, even though it wasn't. He said the timing note was changed after the fact. He said Marjorie Klein insisted it be framed as neutral enforcement. He didn't look at me when he said her name. I didn't interrupt. Confessions collapse if you rush them. He went on. The board chair had asked him to circulate audit notices selectively. The enforcer in crimson had flagged certain addresses, complainers, organizers, anyone who'd question fees. The clipboard queen built the spreadsheets to justify it. The tyrant in heels closed meetings to prevent questions. Elliot said he'd been told it was temporary. He said he'd believed that until the funeral. His hand shook when he mentioned the hearse. He said he'd heard the engine ticking from the office window. He said he'd watched people wait. He said he'd told himself it wasn't his decision. He said that stopped working. I asked one clarifying question about insurance. He nodded immediately. He said Marjorie Klein ordered a review only after the delay became public. He said carriers were contacted with partial information. He said he'd been asked to backdate internal notes to make it look routine. He swallowed hard and added that he refused. Silence filled the space between us, thick, but steady. Outside, a car passed, tires hissing on wet pavement. Elliot finally looked up. His eyes were red, jaw set. He said he couldn't keep doing this. He said he'd cooperate. He said he knew what it would cost him. I told him the truth without dramatics. I said retaliation would be expensive. I said honesty would be cheaper. I said timing mattered. He nodded again, slower, like he was counting. Marjorie Klein emailed while we sat there, a reminder about confidentiality. The board chair CC'd counsel. The enforcer in crimson added urgency. The clipboard queen attached a revised agenda. The tyrant in heels asked for loyalty. Elliot didn't open the message. He slid a small notebook across the table, not as evidence yet, but as memory. Dates, names, instructions. Not documents discovered in a drawer, but notes taken in real time, the kind that live in a person before they live on paper. He said he'd verify everything if asked. He said he'd stand by it. I thanked him and stood. He stayed seated, staring into his cup. As I left, he said one more thing without turning around. He said Marjorie Klein believed escalation would force settlement. He said she underestimated insurers. He said she underestimated grief. Outside, the air felt lighter, not relieved, aligned. The strategy had a spine now. Economic pressure needs witnesses to move from theory to consequence. Elliot had crossed the line that matters most. Back home, I reviewed the map in my head and adjusted it. Carriers, lenders, vendors, timelines. The pressure would be applied where it already hurt. No speeches, no leaks, just sequence. Marjorie Klein thought control came from silence. The board chair thought authority could rewrite cause. The enforcer in crimson thought fear would hold. The clipboard queen thought forms would protect. The tyrant in heels thought loyalty was permanent. They were wrong about permanence. People change when they see the cost, and costs were no longer abstract. They had names, dates, voices, and now a witness willing to speak. I didn't rush after Elliot's confession. Momentum works best when it isn't forced. The next step wasn't exposure. It was alignment. Economic pressure only lands when the sequence is clean. I started at my desk, the one that still held my wife's pen in the drawer. I didn't open files or dig for papers. I mapped relationships instead. Carriers talk to lenders. Lenders talk to buyers. Buyers talk to agents. Agents talk to boards. Pressure travels like water, following the easiest path downhill. Marjorie Klein had already created the slope. The board chair's selective audits, the enforcer in crimson's threats, the clipboard queen's spreadsheets, the tyrant in heels closed sessions. All of it pointed in one direction: retaliation, intent, cost. I called the broker again, not to escalate, but to coordinate timing. He confirmed underwriters would request clarifications within days. He said silence from the board would raise flags. He said partial disclosures were worse than none. I thanked him and ended the call. Next, I spoke with two neighbors who'd asked earlier about assessments. I didn't persuade. I informed. Dates, notices, increases, insurance implications. They listened. They shared with others. Community organizing doesn't require meetings when numbers speak louder. Marjorie Klein sent a message that afternoon announcing a listening session. The board chair framed it as transparency. The enforcer in crimson set strict rules. The clipboard queen required pre-submitted questions. The tyrant in heels limited attendance. It was theater, and everyone knew it. I didn't attend. Instead, I met a realtor who specialized in the area, someone I'd worked with years ago. I asked how assessments and insurance flags affect listings. She answered plainly. Buyers hesitate. Lenders ask. Deals stall. She said one flagged community can chill an entire zip code. I thanked her and left. That evening, I walked the neighborhood again. People stopped me now. They asked what would happen next. I told them the truth. Costs would surface. Timelines would compress. Choices would matter. Calm spreads faster than panic when facts are steady. Marjorie Klein escalated again, calling an emergency board meeting and adding counsel. The board chair claimed urgency. The enforcer in crimson warned about confidentiality. The clipboard queen updated numbers upward. The tyrant in heels promised resolution. None of it addressed cause. I prepared without spectacle. I drafted a notice of intent in my head, not on paper yet. I rehearsed questions insurers would ask. I anticipated deflections. I set reminders for when silence would become expensive. Elliot Marsh sent a brief message confirming availability. No details, just readiness. That mattered. The listening session happened without me. I heard later that questions were cut short, answers vague. Frustration rose. Numbers linger longer than words. The next morning, the carrier requested a conference call. Not with me, with the board. That was the hinge. I didn't celebrate. I adjusted the map again. Marjorie Klein called twice and left one voicemail. Tone softened. The board chair offered to reconsider assessments. The enforcer in crimson suggested a pause. The clipboard queen asked for time. The tyrant in heels proposed a settlement discussion. Timing had shifted. Pressure had found purchase. I waited. Waiting is part of the plan. At dusk, I stood by the oak again, hand on the bark, breathing steady. This wasn't revenge. It was consequence. The difference matters. One corrodes. The other restores balance. By nightfall, messages circulated about rising premiums and lender inquiries. No accusations, just math. The community felt it. So did the board. I turned off my phone and slept. Preparation was complete. The next phase would move without me pushing. Economic pressure doesn't need a narrator. It needs time, witnesses, and a path. Marjorie Klein had built the path herself. The board chair had paved it. The enforcer in crimson had guarded it. The clipboard queen had measured it. The tyrant in heels had hurried everyone onto it. Now it would carry them forward, whether they wanted to go or not. The carrier's call landed mid-morning, not with alarms, but with questions that sounded almost polite. Clarifications, timelines, authority. I wasn't on the line, and that was the point. Economic pressure works best when it doesn't look like pressure at all. By noon, the neighborhood felt different. Cars slowed near the clubhouse. People checked their phones more often. Conversations stopped when doors opened. Marjorie Klein had created urgency again, but this time it wasn't performative. The board chair convened another emergency meeting. The enforcer in crimson enforced attendance. The clipboard queen circulated updated projections. The tyrant in heels promised answers she didn't have. I stayed away and prepared quietly. Preparation at this stage meant restraint. No posts, no statements, no gloating. I spoke only when asked, and only with facts, dates, costs, sequences, calm. Elliot Marsh texted once, just a time and place. We met briefly in a public park, benches spaced wide, voices low. He confirmed the carrier wanted explanations for the burial delay and the audits that followed. He confirmed backdated notes were now a problem. He confirmed counsel was uneasy. His hands were steady this time. That mattered. Marjorie Klein emailed the community with reassurances about temporary fluctuations. The board chair framed increases as market forces. The enforcer in crimson warned against speculation. The clipboard queen attached a FAQ that answered nothing. The tyrant in heels scheduled a town hall with limited questions. I spoke with a lender that afternoon, someone who'd financed several homes on our street. I didn't persuade. I answered. Insurance flags affect underwriting. Special assessments affect debt ratios. Uncertainty affects approvals. He thanked me and said he'd wait for clarity before moving forward on 2 pending loans. By evening, the ripple widened. A buyer paused. A seller called an agent. An agent called the board called counsel called the carrier. Sequence matters. Marjorie Klein called me directly, voice measured, asking for a conversation. The board chair offered compromise. The enforcer in crimson suggested confidentiality again. The clipboard queen emailed a revised assessment schedule. The tyrant in heels asked for patience. I said I was available after the carrier finished its review. Silence followed. Expensive silence. The town hall arrived and unraveled quickly. Questions piled up. Answers drifted. Numbers contradicted each other. People noticed. Frustration sharpened into resolve. This wasn't anger, it was calculation. I watched from a distance as neighbors left early, shaking heads, phones already out. No speeches were needed. Costs were visible now. Tangible. Personal. Late that night, Elliot sent a final confirmation. The carrier would require a written response addressing intent and retaliation. He said Marjorie Klein was pushing for delay. He said the board chair was worried about premiums. He said the enforcer in crimson was pressuring staff. He said the clipboard queen was revising spreadsheets again. He said the tyrant in heels was losing patience. I slept lightly and woke before dawn, not anxious, just alert. The house was quiet. The oak outside held steady. By mid-morning, the notice arrived. Premiums would increase pending review. Coverage would be conditional, lenders would be informed, vendors would adjust. It wasn't punishment. It was math. The community reacted with clarity. Calls went out, meetings formed, not protests, calculations. People asked how to stop the bleeding. The answer wasn't loud. It was structural. Marjorie Klein had wanted leverage. She'd found it, turned inward. The board chair had wanted authority. She'd found accountability. The enforcer in crimson had wanted fear. She'd found scrutiny. The clipboard queen had wanted order. She'd found exposure. The tyrant in heels had wanted speed. She'd found delay. Preparation was complete. The pressure was fully engaged. What came next would be public, unavoidable, and decisive. The implementation didn't arrive with sirens or headlines. It arrived with calendars filling up and voices lowering. By the time Marjorie Klein called the next meeting, the outcome had already begun to crystallize. The board chair framed it as a reset. The enforcer in crimson framed it as damage control. The clipboard queen framed it as recalibration. The tyrant in heels framed it as leadership. None of those words changed the numbers. I arrived early and took a seat near the back, not hiding, not performing. The room felt smaller than before. People sat farther apart. Phones stayed face down. The air carried the weight of cost. Economic pressure changes posture before it changes policy. Marjorie Klein opened with a prepared statement about responsibility. The board chair spoke about market volatility. The enforcer in crimson warned about decorum. The clipboard queen projected revised figures that climbed again. The tyrant in heels announced a vote to authorize counsel to negotiate with the carrier. It was the first admission that the carrier mattered. I listened and waited. Implementation requires patience. When the floor opened, questions came sharper now. Why were premiums rising? Why were lenders asking questions? Why were vendors adjusting terms? Each answer circled the truth without touching it. I stood once. I didn't accuse. I stated sequence. The burial delay, the audits, the assessments, the carrier review, the lender inquiries, the costs. I spoke slowly, evenly, and sat down. No rebuttal followed. Silence landed where arguments used to. Elliot Marsh spoke next, voice steady. He confirmed timelines without drama. He confirmed decisions were verbal. He confirmed notes were requested after the fact. He didn't editorialize. He didn't need to. The room absorbed it. Marjorie Klein interrupted, tone tight, questioning relevance. The board chair tried to redirect. The enforcer in crimson moved closer to the podium. The clipboard queen stopped projecting. The tyrant in heels asked for order. Order arrived anyway, in the form of attention. Counsel finally spoke, choosing words carefully. Exposure, retaliation, mitigation, cooperation. The vocabulary shifted from authority to consequence. Implementation was underway. A motion passed to suspend assessments pending review. Another authorized independent oversight. A third scheduled a public session with the carrier present. Each vote felt heavier than the last. Costs had forced clarity. I didn't celebrate. I wrote nothing down. I watched faces. Relief mixed with anger, then settled into resolve. This wasn't a win yet. It was a turn. Outside, night had fallen. The parking lot lights hummed. People lingered, talking quietly. A neighbor thanked me without smiling. Another asked what came next. I said the truth. Accountability. Time. Repair. Marjorie Klein left without speaking to anyone, heels sharp against the pavement. The board chair followed, shoulders tense. The enforcer in crimson stayed close. The clipboard queen gathered papers with shaking hands. The tyrant in heels paused, scanning the lot like she was measuring exits. At home, I sat at the table again and breathed. Implementation is the moment when intention meets reality. The pressure had moved from abstract to operational. Systems were adjusting. Costs were recalculating. People were choosing. Before sleep, I checked my phone once. Messages from neighbors, from Elliot, from a lender. No congratulations, just updates. That was right. I stood by the oak and listened to the night. Dignity had been interrupted, not erased. Repair would take longer than delay, but the path was clear now. Marjorie Klein had forced the issue. The board chair had misjudged the response. The enforcer in crimson had leaned too hard. The clipboard queen had trusted spreadsheets over people. The tyrant in heels had confused speed with control. Implementation doesn't shout, it proceeds. And once it starts, it's very hard to stop. The public session filled the auditorium before sunset, folding chairs scraping, voices low, cameras set on tripods near the aisle. Marjorie Klein took the front table with counsel, posture rigid, eyes forward. The board chair spoke first, calling the meeting to order while the enforcer in crimson stood watch. The clipboard queen arranged binders. The tyrant in heels checked the clock. I sat mid-row among neighbors, lenders, agents, and a carrier representative whose badge caught the light. When the doors closed, the room quieted. Marjorie Klein nodded to counsel. The board chair summarized events without dates. The enforcer in crimson warned about decorum. The clipboard queen projected timelines. The tyrant in heels invited statements. Public comment opened. A neighbor described the delay at the gate. Another spoke about audits that followed. I stood and stated sequence only, careful and slow. Burial delayed, audits issued, assessments raised, carrier review triggered. Lender questions followed. I sat. Silence held. Elliot Marsh approached the microphone next, hands steady, voice even. He confirmed verbal instructions, selective audits, and the timing change. He said notes were requested after the fact. He said he refused. Marjorie Klein objected. The board chair attempted to redirect. The enforcer in crimson stepped closer. The clipboard queen froze the slide. The tyrant in heels called for order. Counsel addressed the room, choosing precision over defense. Exposure existed. Retaliation increased risk. Mitigation required transparency and cooperation. The carrier representative nodded once. Phones lifted. Numbers mattered now. Questions followed from the crowd, sharper, shorter. Why was the route blocked? Who ordered it? Why audits clustered? Why assessments rose? Answers circled. The board chair deferred. The enforcer in crimson warned again. The clipboard queen promised updates. The tyrant in heels pressed for votes. A motion passed to suspend penalties. Another authorized an independent review with the carrier present. Applause broke, then faded. Marjorie Klein stared ahead. The board chair exhaled. The enforcer in crimson checked exits. The clipboard queen gathered papers. The tyrant in heels tightened her jaw. I didn't speak again. The confrontation belonged to the room now. Neighbors compared notes. Agents whispered. Lenders typed. The carrier representative scheduled follow-ups. Accountability had witnesses. Outside, night cooled the air. Cameras packed up. People lingered, quieter than before. Marjorie Klein left with counsel without comment. The board chair followed. The enforcer in crimson stayed close. The clipboard queen avoided eyes. The tyrant in heels paused, then walked on. I stood by the oak afterward, listening to the hum of traffic. This was public, unavoidable, and decisive. Not revenge, consequence. The numbers would finish the work. By morning, notices changed tone. Penalties paused. Reviews announced. Vendors adjusted terms. The carrier requested sworn responses. Elliot confirmed availability. I answered questions with dates and costs. The community recalculated expectations. Calm replaced rumor. Pressure stayed constant. At the follow-up session, microphones captured steadier voices. Counsel acknowledged risk. The board chair accepted oversight. The enforcer in crimson enforced time limits without threats. The clipboard queen corrected figures publicly. The tyrant in heels conceded process failures. Each admission reduced uncertainty and raised accountability. I watched faces as the room learned together. No shouting, no triumph, just reckoning. The carrier representative outlined next steps. Lenders asked timelines. Agents noted disclosures. Neighbors nodded. Marjorie Klein listened, finally, without interrupting. The board chair took notes. The enforcer in crimson relaxed her stance. The clipboard queen breathed out. The tyrant in heels stopped checking the clock. The public moment did its work. Accountability had an audience, and audiences remember. The confrontation closed without applause, but with clarity. What followed would be formal, documented, and binding. Tonight proved the truth could stand in the open and hold. I went home steady, knowing the end was near. Public light changes outcomes. It had tonight. Tomorrow would finalize terms. Today had set them. The crowd ensured it. Consequences moved forward, witnessed, measured, and unavoidable for everyone involved there. The settlement arrived quietly, like the last note after a long vigil. By the time I read it, the community already felt the shift. Premiums stabilized. Penalties stayed suspended. Oversight terms were signed. The math had finished speaking, and everyone had listened. Marjorie Klein accepted the terms without ceremony. The board chair acknowledged failures in writing. The enforcer in crimson stood down. The clipboard queen corrected records publicly. The tyrant in heels agreed to open meetings and independent review. None of it felt like victory, it felt like repair beginning. I attended the final session only to witness closure. Counsel summarized obligations. The carrier confirmed coverage adjustments contingent on compliance. Lenders lifted holds. Vendors restored schedules. Neighbors exhaled together. Accountability had moved from promise to practice. Afterward, Marjorie Klein passed me in the hall. No words, just a glance that recognized consequence. The board chair followed, eyes tired. The enforcer in crimson avoided my gaze. The clipboard queen nodded once. The tyrant in heels paused, then walked on. Closure doesn't require apologies to be real. I returned home and sat at the table where my wife and I planned our life. The house was quiet, not empty. I placed the settlement in a drawer and closed it. Some documents belong there. Some memories don't. The oak outside caught the afternoon light. I stood beneath it and breathed. Dignity had been delayed, not denied. The route remained open now, not because someone granted permission, but because the community insisted on respect. That difference matters. Neighbors stopped by over the next days, not to celebrate, but to understand what changed. I told them the truth. Costs surfaced. Silence ended. Witnesses spoke. Systems adjusted. Repair followed. It wasn't fast. It was fair. Marjorie Klein's authority ended where accountability began. The board chair learned that consistency without compassion creates risk. The enforcer in crimson learned that fear is expensive. The clipboard queen learned that process must serve people. The tyrant in heels learned that speed without judgment multiplies harm. Lessons linger longer than penalties. Grief doesn't resolve with settlements. It softens when respect returns. I visited the cemetery at dusk and thanked my wife for trusting me with the hard parts. I promised her I'd keep choosing steadiness over noise. I left the gate open behind me. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. I drove home as the sky dimmed, knowing this chapter was complete. Not erased, completed. The community moved forward with clearer rules and quieter nights. Accountability held. Dignity stood. And the math, once again, had done its work. Sleep returned in fragments, then whole nights. The neighborhood adjusted to transparency, agendas posted early, questions answered plainly. Insurance reviews concluded with conditions met, fees normalized. Trust, once cracked, began its slow repair. I kept my routine simple, walking the route at dawn, listening to birds replace engines, letting quiet do its work. When people asked how to prevent this again, I said the same thing each time. Watch timing, follow costs, protect dignity. Power hides in procedure until someone names the price. We named it together. The lesson stayed. It stayed with me on ordinary days, in grocery aisles and stoplights, a reminder that care is a practice. I carried my wife forward by choosing it. The community carried itself by insisting on it. Nothing here was loud. Everything was lasting. I closed the drawer once more and turned off the light, certain the work would hold. Accountability had a memory now, and memory guards dignity better than rules ever could. That knowledge steadied me, and it steadied us, as we moved on without forgetting. Closure arrived, complete enough to live with, honest enough to teach, and strong enough to endure. For everyone involved. Here.